Nobody at that private dinner was prepared for the moment the door opened. Your soulmate had been sitting there believing the evening was only about family, future plans, and decisions that had already been made. But the unexpected guest who walked into that room carried something far more dangerous than an invitation. They carried a question connected directly to you. And when that question was finally spoken out loud, every conversation stopped, every confident face changed, and your soulmates suddenly realized that the people around them had been hiding far more than they ever admitted. Listen carefully. Because this was not an ordinary dinner, and that guest did not arrive by accident. The entire evening had been carefully arranged behind closed doors. Certain relatives had been invited. Certain conversations were supposed to happen. Certain decisions about your soulmate's future were expected to be finalized before anyone left the table. They wanted the night to feel controlled, respectable, and predictable. They believed they had already removed every uncomfortable subject from the room. But there was one subject they could never truly remove: you. Your name had been avoided for months, perhaps even years, because every time someone mentioned you, the truth became harder to bury. The unexpected guest entered quietly, but the reaction around the table was immediate. One person looked down. Another stopped speaking. Someone else suddenly became nervous, almost as if they recognized exactly why this person had come. Your soulmate noticed it too. They could feel the atmosphere change before a single important word was spoken. The guest was offered a chair, but they didn't sit immediately. Instead, they looked directly at your soulmate and said they had only come because there was one question that needed an honest answer before another decision was made. That was when the room became painfully still. The guest asked, if you were truly the problem. Why did everyone work so hard to keep the two of you from speaking again? Nobody answered. Not one person. The silence was so heavy that your soulmate could hear their own breathing. Because suddenly that question exposed something they had never allowed themselves to examine. If you had truly been wrong for them, why had people needed secret conversations? Why had messages disappeared? Why had meetings happened without them knowing? Why had certain relatives become nervous whenever your name came up? Why had everyone demanded that your soulmate move forward quickly instead of allowing them to hear your side? Your soulmate looked around the table waiting for somebody to explain. But the people who had always been so confident suddenly had nothing to say. And that silence hurt more than an argument ever could. Because silence can become an answer when everyone knows the truth, your soulmate began remembering moments they had ignored. A message they were told never arrived. A call they were convinced you never made. A promise they believed you had broken. A conversation that was repeated to them differently by 3 different people. For the first time, all those disconnected moments began forming one disturbing picture. Maybe the separation had never happened naturally. Maybe certain people had quietly pushed it into existence. Don't skip. Because the guest was not finished. They reached into their coat and placed something on the table. It was not dramatic. It was not expensive. It was only a small envelope. But the second one family member saw it, their expression changed completely. Your soulmate noticed. They asked what was inside. The guest said, "Proof that somebody in this room knew the truth about you long before tonight." That sentence shattered whatever control remained at the dinner. One relative immediately tried to stop the conversation. Another insisted this was not the right time. Someone even suggested the guest leave before causing unnecessary damage. But your soulmate refused. For perhaps the first time in a very long time, they stopped allowing other people to decide what they were allowed to hear. They looked at the envelope and said, "Open it." The guest slowly removed several pages. Your soulmate recognized the dates first. Those dates came from the exact period when everything between the two of you began falling apart. There were records of conversations your soulmate had never known existed. There were notes about decisions made for their own good. There were references to you, your intentions, and something you had tried desperately to explain before contact between the two of you was suddenly cut off. Your soulmate's hands started trembling. They looked across the table and asked the question nobody wanted to hear. Who knew about this? Again, silence. But this time, one person began crying. And that was when your soulmate understood that the unexpected guest had not come simply to ask about you. They had come to expose the person who had been controlling the story from the beginning. The guest turned toward the person who was crying and said quietly, "Tell them what you did." Your soulmate froze. Because the person sitting there was someone they had trusted more than almost anyone. Someone who had comforted them after losing you. Someone who had told them that you had moved on. Someone who had encouraged them to close the door forever. And now that same person was staring at the table, unable to deny what was inside that envelope. Your soulmate whispered, "Was I lied to?" The person finally looked up. Their face said everything before their mouth could form the words. They admitted they had interfered. They admitted they had hidden information. They admitted they believed separating the two of you was the right thing to do. But then your soulmate asked one final question. "Did you ever stop trying to reach me?" The guest looked directly into your soulmate's eyes. And their answer was about to change everything your soulmate believed about the day they lost you. The guest did not answer immediately. They looked around the table first, almost as if giving everyone one final chance to tell the truth before they did it for them. Your soulmate's eyes never left their face. The question was still hanging in the room like a wound nobody could close. Had you ever stopped trying to reach them? Had you really walked away the way everyone claimed? Or had the story they were given been carefully built to make them believe you no longer cared? The guest finally said, "No. You never stopped trying." Your soulmate went completely still. For a few seconds, they did not react at all. It was as if their heart had understood the words before their mind could accept them. Then they looked toward the person who had already admitted interfering and asked, "What does that mean?" But the person could barely speak now. The guest answered instead. They explained that you had reached out more than once. You had sent messages. You had tried to explain what really happened. You had asked for one honest conversation before everything ended permanently. And at least one of those messages had never reached your soulmate because someone had made sure it didn't. That revelation changed the entire room. Your soulmate pushed their chair back slightly, their breathing becoming uneven. All those years of believing you had chosen silence. All those nights spent wondering why you never fought harder. All those painful moments when they forced themselves to accept that you had moved on without looking back. Suddenly none of it felt certain anymore. The guest continued, saying there had been one message in particular that was never meant to disappear. A message written at a moment when you still believed the relationship could be saved. In it, you had not blamed your soulmate. You had not begged. You had not tried to manipulate them. You had simply told the truth. You had said that something was happening around both of you that neither of you fully understood. You had said that people were speaking for you without your permission. You had said that if your soulmate heard something painful about you, they should ask you directly before believing it. And then came the line that broke them emotionally. You had written, "If you still choose to leave after hearing the truth from me, I will respect it. But please don't let someone else make that choice for us." Your soulmate lowered their head. One hand covered their face. Because that was the exact choice they now realized they had made. Not necessarily because they stopped loving you. Not because the connection meant nothing. But because they trusted other voices more than the one person they should have confronted directly. The person who had interfered finally began explaining themselves. They said they thought they were protecting your soulmate. They claimed they believed the relationship would eventually bring more pain. They insisted they never imagined the separation would last this long. But every explanation only made your soulmate more emotional. Because protection without truth had become manipulation, and love without giving someone the freedom to choose had become control. Your soulmate looked up and asked, "Did you read the message before hiding it?" The person hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Yes. Your soulmate's expression changed instantly. They asked, "So you knew what you were trying to tell me?" Another silence. Yes. And you still kept it from me? The person began crying harder. But your soulmate was no longer focused on the tears. They were focused on the years that could never be returned. The birthdays that passed. The nights of regret. The relationships that came and went. The moments when they almost reached out to you but stopped because someone had convinced them that you wanted nothing more to do with them. Suddenly, everything looked different. The guest placed another folded paper on the table. Your soulmate stared at it and asked what it was. The guest said, "This is the part nobody here expected me to bring." Everyone looked toward the paper. Even the person who had confessed became visibly afraid. Your soulmate slowly reached for it. Inside was a copy of a private conversation that had taken place shortly after the two of you were separated. A conversation between two people your soulmate trusted. And the words inside made it clear that the separation had not simply been encouraged after it happened. Someone had been planning for it before either of you knew anything was wrong. Your soulmate read one line twice. Then a third time. Their face turned pale. The line said, "Once they stop speaking directly, everything else will be easy." That sentence changed the entire meaning of the past. This had not been one emotional mistake. It had been a strategy. A strategy built around keeping the two of you from having one honest conversation. Your soulmate looked across the table and demanded to know who had written it. Nobody answered. The guest finally pointed towards someone who had remained unusually quiet all evening. Someone who had not cried. Someone who had not defended themselves. Someone who had barely moved since the envelope was opened. Your soulmate slowly turned toward them. And for the first time that night, fear entered their voice. "Was this you?" The person looked back without answering. Your soulmate stood up. "Was this you?" The entire table waited. Then the person finally said, "You don't understand why I did it." And those words were enough to confirm everything. Your soulmate's eyes filled with tears, but their voice became stronger. "Then make me understand." The person took a slow breath and said the reason had never been simple jealousy, family pride, or personal dislike. They had separated the two of you because they were afraid of what would happen if your soulmate discovered one hidden truth connected to you. A truth that had been kept buried for years. A truth powerful enough to explain why certain people had worked so desperately to keep you apart. And when your soulmate asked what that truth was, the person looked directly at them and said 5 words that made the entire room freeze. "Because you were never the problem." Your soulmate stood there staring at the person across the table, waiting for the rest of the truth. Those 5 words had landed harder than anything else said that evening. You were never the problem. For years, they had been given reasons to doubt you. Reasons to question your intentions. Reasons to believe you had become distant, careless, or unwilling to fight for what the two of you had. But now the very person connected to the separation was admitting that none of that had been the real reason. Your soulmate's voice shook as they asked, "Then what was the problem?" Nobody moved. The person who had confessed looked toward the unexpected guest, almost as if hoping they would stop the conversation. But the guest remained silent. There was no rescue coming this time. No distraction. No convenient excuse. No way to send everyone home and pretend the truth had never surfaced. Finally, the person said, "The problem was what would happen if the two of you stayed together long enough to discover what had been hidden." Your soulmate's expression changed. Hidden by who? The answer came quietly. By this family. That sentence cut through the room. Several relatives immediately protested. Someone said the confession was going too far. Another insisted that old family matters had nothing to do with your relationship. But your soulmate was finished accepting half-truths. They looked at every person around the table and said, "If it had nothing to do with us, why did you destroy us to protect it?" Nobody could answer. The unexpected guest stepped forward and explained that years earlier, before you and your soulmate ever understood the depth of your connection, two families had already crossed paths in a way neither of you knew about. There had been an agreement, a promise, a financial decision made behind closed doors. And your name was connected to something one side of the family had desperately tried to keep buried. Your soulmate's eyes narrowed. They asked what kind of agreement could possibly justify separating two people who loved each other. The guest reached back into the envelope and removed an older document. The paper was worn at the edges. The date on it was from long before the breakup. Long before the arguments. Long before anyone told your soulmate that leaving you was the smartest thing they could do. The guest placed it in front of them. Your soulmate began reading. At first, the words meant nothing. Then they saw a familiar surname. Then another. And suddenly the entire room felt smaller. Because the document showed that someone from your family had once protected someone from theirs during a devastating moment. Not with empty promises. Not with words. With a sacrifice that had changed the direction of their family's future. Your soulmate whispered, "Why was I never told this?" The guest replied, "Because if you knew what your family had done for theirs, you would have started asking why they treated you like a threat." That was the moment your soulmate's emotions broke through. They had spent years believing you were the outsider. The complication. The person who supposedly did not belong in their future. But now they were discovering that your family had once helped protect the very people who later pushed you away. Your soulmate looked toward an older relative at the table. "You knew?" The relative could not meet their eyes. That silence answered everything. Your soulmate asked again, louder this time. "You knew what their family had done for us, and you still let me believe you were the problem?" The older relative finally said, "It wasn't about what they had done. It was about what they knew." That changed everything again. The unexpected guest slowly turned toward them. Your soulmate immediately caught the wording. "What did you know?" The older relative shut their eyes. No one spoke. Your soulmate leaned forward. "What did you know that scared all of you this much?" The relative finally admitted that, shortly before the separation, you had discovered a detail connected to that old agreement. You had asked questions. You had noticed inconsistencies. You had begun connecting names and dates that certain people never expected anyone to examine. And that was why the pressure against you suddenly became so intense. You were getting too close to something. Your soulmate's hands clenched around the paper. They remembered how quickly everything had changed back then. 1 month, people tolerated the relationship. The next month, everyone seemed determined to end it. Family members began questioning your character. Small misunderstandings became huge accusations. Private disagreements somehow became public family discussions. People started telling your soulmate that staying with you would ruin their future. And now they finally understood the timing. It had never been random. Your soulmate looked at the unexpected guest and asked, "What did you discover?" The guest's expression softened. They said you had discovered evidence that one person inside the family had benefited enormously from a decision that should never have been made. A decision involving money. A decision involving loyalty. And worst of all, a decision that had hurt someone who trusted them completely. Your soulmate looked around the table. Who? The guest did not answer immediately. Instead, they pulled out one final page. The person who had been sitting quietly all evening suddenly stood up. Enough. Everyone turned. Their face had changed completely. The calm was gone. The confidence was gone. For the first time, they looked genuinely afraid. They demanded that the guest stop talking. Your soulmate stepped between them and the table. "No. You don't get to decide what I hear anymore." The room fell silent. The unexpected guest handed your soulmate the page. At the bottom was a signature. Your soulmate recognized it instantly. It belonged to the same person now trying desperately to stop the truth from coming out. Your soulmate stared at them in disbelief. "You did this?" The person shook their head and said the document did not show the full story. But your soulmate had already seen enough to know why you had become dangerous to them. You had discovered something they never wanted exposed. And instead of answering your questions, they had turned the entire family against you. They made your soulmate believe you were becoming obsessive. They called your questions suspicious. They said you were trying to create conflict. They convinced everyone that distance was necessary. And the moment you and your soulmate stopped speaking directly, the plan worked exactly as intended. Your soulmate's voice broke. "So I lost the person I loved because you were afraid they would expose you?" The person said nothing. That silence was brutal. Your soulmate turned away, overwhelmed by the weight of everything they were learning. For years, they had punished themselves for losing you. They thought they had failed to recognize your love. They thought maybe the timing had simply been wrong. But tonight they were learning that the relationship had been deliberately weakened until both of you became too hurt and confused to understand what was happening. Then the unexpected guest revealed something even more emotional. They said that after the separation, you had been given a choice. Stay silent and walk away. Or expose everything and risk destroying relationships your soulmate still depended on. Your soulmate's eyes filled instantly. "What did you choose?" The guest looked at them and said, "You chose to protect them." That answer shattered your soulmate. Because even after being blamed, misunderstood, and pushed out, you had apparently kept silent to protect the person you still cared about. You had carried the truth alone. You had allowed them to think the worst of you because revealing everything might have torn their family apart. Your soulmate sat down slowly. Tears finally fell. They whispered, "So all this time, You could have destroyed their lies. Yes. And you didn't? No. Why? The guest looked straight at them. Because you told me that if telling the truth would destroy the people they loved, you would rather let them hate you than watch their world collapse. Nobody at the table could look at your soulmate after that. Because suddenly your absence looked completely different. Your silence was no longer rejection. It was sacrifice. Your distance was no longer proof that you stopped caring. It was the price you paid to protect someone who did not even know they were being protected. Your soulmate covered their mouth as they cried. Then they asked the question that changed the direction of the entire evening. Where are they now? The unexpected guest hesitated. Your soulmate immediately stood again. Please. After everything I just learned, don't hide one more thing from me. Where is you now? The guest looked toward the door. Then toward the window. Then back at your soulmate. And finally said, closer than you think. Your soulmate froze. The guest explained that they had not come to that private dinner alone. Someone else had arrived with them. Someone who had refused to walk into the room until your soulmate heard the truth first. Someone who had been waiting outside because they did not want another reunion built on confusion, guilt, or manipulation. Your soulmate's entire body went still. They whispered, "No." The guest slowly nodded. And then came the words nobody at that table was prepared to hear. You are outside. Every face turned toward the doorway. Your soulmate stopped breathing for a second. After all the years. After all the lies. After every missed chance. After everything they had just discovered. There was only one door standing between them and the person they had never truly stopped loving. But before your soulmate could reach for the handle, the guest grabbed their arm and said, "There is one more thing you need to know before you open that door." Your soulmate turned back. The guest's expression had become serious again. Because you had not come there simply to hear an apology. You had come carrying a decision of your own. And depending on what your soulmate did next, that decision could either reopen the love story everyone tried to destroy, or close it forever.